I am Aaron Collins, 29 years old, a freelance photographer living in Austin, Texas. My days pass quietly along the sun-drenched, windy streets, moving from one shoot to the next. Life is so simple that sometimes I'm not sure if I'm truly living or merely existing in a mechanical way. No family of my own, no close friends, just my old camera that accompanies me from day to day. In the evenings, I return to my small, damp apartment and sit for hours in front of the screen editing photos, in a silence so complete that I can almost hear time slipping away. That day, on a late autumn afternoon when Austin's weather was gentle with a slight chill in the breeze, I decided to stop by the familiar supermarket on the corner to pick up a few small items. Just milk, bread, and some vegetables, the basic things needed to sustain existence. My mind at that moment was still drifting quietly along the rhythm of my solitary life, expecting nothing more than a quick shopping trip so I could return home and continue my work. The supermarket was more crowded than usual. The sound of shopping carts rolling over the tiled floor, the chatter and laughter of housewives, and the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting from the bakery section filled the air. I pushed my rickety cart, weaving through the narrow aisles between towering shelves, trying to focus on the mental shopping list. But then, amid the hurried crowd from a distance, I suddenly caught sight of a figure. A woman around her mid-50s, slender in build with snow-white hair neatly tied back, walking slowly and gracefully. My heart seemed to stop. No, it couldn't be. She looked exactly like my mother, Elizabeth Collins, the woman who had passed away 2 years earlier in a car accident that I still couldn't accept. I froze in the middle of the aisle, my hands gripping the cart handle so tightly that my knuckles turned white. A wave of shock crashed over me, sweeping away all logical thought. My mother, with her warm smile, her calloused hands from years of housework, her gentle voice that had always comforted me through long, lonely nights. Memories of her final days flooded back intensely like an old film being rewound. I remember it clearly. 2 years ago, she lay in the hospital bed, her body frail after the accident, yet her eyes still filled with love. "Aaron, my son, I'll be fine," she whispered, stroking my cheek. She had sacrificed everything for me, from working 2 jobs to put me through school, to shielding me from my father's outbursts of anger. She was my pillar, the only light in my life. And then she was gone, leaving me with an unending emptiness. I stood motionless for a few seconds, trying to convince myself I was mistaken. "It's just a coincidence, Aaron. The world is full of people who look alike," I muttered in my head. But the emptiness and pain in my heart made my breathing quicken, as if someone were squeezing my chest. My heart pounded, cold sweat broke out despite the cool air of the supermarket. My legs felt weak, as though I might collapse. People around me passed by carefree with their full carts, but for me, the world had narrowed to only that figure. She was selecting fruit in the produce section, holding a red apple, turning it over as if checking for ripeness. That posture was so familiar. My mother used to do exactly the same thing, always careful with every item of food. Instinctively, I pushed my cart toward her, my eyes never leaving her. I tried to find some detail that was different to reassure myself it was just a random resemblance. Perhaps the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes or the way she held her basket. I stealthily moved closer, my heart racing like a war drum. Every step was an internal struggle. But the pain of losing my mother, the loneliness accumulated over 2 years, made it impossible for me to stop. I remembered the long nights after the funeral, sitting alone in my room, staring at her portrait and crying until there were no tears left. My father, Frank, had quickly remarried Beverly, and his life seemed to continue without any void. And me? I remained stuck there with memories that never faded. The closer I got, the more each of her gestures plunged me into utter confusion. The way she selected items, tilting her head to one side to read labels, even standing and staring at a product for a long time before deciding to put it in her basket. All of it was achingly familiar. My mother was the same, always weighing every purchase carefully, saving every penny. My throat felt dry. My hands trembled as I pushed the cart. She was right in front of me, only a few meters away. I could even smell a faint trace of perfume, the exact scent my mother used to wear, a cheap but warm fragrance from the local store. It can't be, I thought. but my heart screamed that this was her, in the flesh. The pent-up emotions finally overwhelmed me. I couldn't bear it any longer. Suddenly I called out, "Mom!" my voice trembling, almost forgetting the surroundings. The cry echoed through the noisy supermarket, causing a few nearby people to turn and look. The woman paused for a moment as if someone had yanked her backward. She turned to look at me, her eyes narrowing in scrutiny, momentarily surprised but quickly regaining composure. My heart pounded as I waited for a smile, a hug, or any sign that this was a miracle. But then she spoke, her voice low, clear, and firm. "Excuse me, did you just call me Mom?" That voice was completely unfamiliar. It wasn't the soft, warm tone of my mother from my memories, the voice that used to hum old lullabies. This was the voice of a strong, confident woman without hesitation. I immediately recognized the difference. I noticed more clearly her sharp eyes, her calm demeanor like that of a businesswoman, and the elegance radiating from her attire, a high-quality wool coat, polished leather shoes. Completely unlike my mother, the simple woman in worn-out clothes who always smiled kindly despite life's hardships. That difference yanked me back to reality in a cruel way. I realized I had let grief override my reason, that this was just a stranger who resembled my mother. Tears welled up, but I held them back. I stammered, my voice breaking. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You look so much like my late mother. She passed away 2 years ago. I didn't mean to disturb you." She looked at me for a moment, her eyes softening slightly, but she said nothing more. Then she turned away and pushed her cart toward the checkout. But in that brief moment, as her gaze passed over me, there was something indefinable. Not pity, but curiosity or perhaps recognition. It left me frozen with the feeling that this encounter was not yet over. My heart was still racing and a vague unease crept into my mind. I stood there in the aisle, watching her figure gradually disappear into the crowd. The people around me continued their lives, but for me, the world had just been turned upside down. Why did she resemble her so much? Why did that glance send a chill down my spine? I tried to finish my shopping, but my hands shook as I held my wallet. Back home, I collapsed onto the sofa, my camera lying haphazardly beside me. Memories of my mother flooded back again, but this time mixed with the image of the strange woman. I wondered if I was going mad from the pain. Or was this a sign of something greater? That night, sleep did not come easily. I lay awake, listening to the Austin wind whispering outside the window, and that feeling of anticipation clung to me relentlessly, like a warning of what was to come. The next day, I woke up well past noon with dark circles under my eyes and a head that felt heavy, as if stuffed with cotton. Even strong black coffee didn't help much. It only made my heart beat faster, as though reminding me of that moment in the supermarket. I looked around my tiny apartment. Photos hung haphazardly on the walls, most of them pictures of my mother taken when I was little, her smile always radiant despite how hard life had been. "Mom, what am I thinking?" I muttered, my hand gently stroking the frame. The decision came quite suddenly. I needed to visit my father. Perhaps returning to Sugarland, breathing the familiar air, would help me temporarily push the chaos in my mind aside. I packed a few essentials, instinctively slipping my camera into the bag as always, and hit the road without further thought. The drive from Austin to Sugarland takes about 3 hours, but today it felt endless. The wide-open I-10 highway, flanked by lush green fields on both sides, and the vast Texas sky overhead passed unnoticed by my distracted mind. The image of that woman kept replaying in my head like a film loop that wouldn't stop. Interwoven with it were memories of my mother, her beaming smile as I photographed her in the kitchen, her tight embrace after a tiring day at work, her whisper of, "You are everything to me," before sleep. But now those memories felt distorted, as if covered by a layer of fog. Why did she resemble her so much? And that final glance, what did it carry? Pity or a secret? The nameless unease grew larger, like a balloon inflating in my chest, causing me to grip the steering wheel so tightly that my hands went numb. I turned on the radio for distraction, but the melancholy country songs only made everything worse. When I arrived in Sugarland, the sun was already tilting toward late afternoon, painting the peaceful suburban houses in shades of red. My father's house was unchanged, a modest two-story home with a neatly trimmed lawn. Frank Collins, my father, opened the door with his familiar smile, but I noticed he had aged more, his hair grayer, his eyes showing fatigue. "Aaron, my boy, coming for a surprise visit," he said, patting my shoulder with a warm but slightly forced tone. Inside, Beverly, my stepmother, was busy in the kitchen. She was about 10 years younger than my father, with glossy blonde hair and stylish clothing that always made me feel out of place. "Hi, Aaron. Come in. It's perfect timing. We're having your favorite grilled steak tonight," she said, her bright smile not quite reaching her eyes. Dinner unfolded in the usual atmosphere whenever I visited, warm on the surface but always somewhat strained. We sat around the old wooden dining table with steaming plates of steak, fresh salad, and toasted bread. My father and Beverly chatted about work. He talked about new construction contracts. She boasted about the small fashion boutique she managed. "The market's picking up, Aaron. I think this year will be better," he said enthusiastically. Beverly chimed in. "And I just got a new shipment from California. The customers are loving it." I listened, occasionally adding polite remarks like, "Sounds like things are going well," or "That's great. Congratulations, Dad," trying to maintain a calm facade despite the turmoil inside. Each bite was hard to swallow as the image of the woman from the supermarket kept hovering, distracting me. I looked at my father, wondering if he noticed anything odd about me. He kept smiling and talking, but the atmosphere felt heavier than usual, as if an invisible membrane enveloped the room. When dinner ended and the mood grew quieter, only the clinking of dishes being cleared, the suspicion building inside me finally erupted. I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," I said, my voice slightly trembling but trying to stay steady. My father and Beverly paused, looking at me curiously. I took a deep breath and began recounting how I had seen a woman in the supermarket who looked exactly like my mother. I described every detail. Spotting her from afar, my heart stopping, following her and calling out, "Mom," her voice denying it, but that final glance. I told it slowly, trying to convey the shock I felt, hoping they would understand and share it. As I recounted each detail, I noticed the attitudes of the two people in front of me change noticeably, like a sudden cold wind blowing through the room. Beverly reacted first. She raised an eyebrow disdainfully, flashing a sarcastic, twisted smile as if looking at a foolish child. "Oh my God, Aaron, you still haven't gotten over the shock of losing your mother. It's been 2 years and you're still letting emotions fuel your imagination like this. People look alike. It's not unusual. You should see a therapist," she said, her voice sweet but laced with mockery. I felt the blood rush to my face, but I held back. She was always like that, friendly on the surface, but her words cut like knives. In stark contrast to her coldness, my father showed clear tension. He avoided my eyes, his hands gripping his water glass so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "You got the wrong person, Aaron. It was just a coincidence," he snapped, his voice higher than usual, as if trying to convince himself. I was surprised. My father was usually calm, but now he kept insisting the story was nothing worth discussing, as if desperate to shut down the topic quickly. "Let it go. Don't overthink it. Have some fruit. Beverly made a great fruit salad." He immediately changed the subject, hastily trying to pull the conversation back to normal, asking about my photography work in an artificially cheerful tone. I sat there, stunned by my father's overreaction. Why was he so tense? The averted gaze, the trembling voice, it wasn't like him at all. I sensed something was wrong, like a faint burning smell in the air signaling a smoldering fire. But I didn't press it. I just nodded and forced a smile, letting the conversation flow in the direction he wanted. Inside, the unease grew larger, like a ticking time bomb. Why had my father reacted as if I had touched a forbidden secret? And Beverly with that mocking smile. It sent chills down my spine. When I left the house, it was pitch dark outside, the streetlights of Sugarland faintly illuminating the quiet neighborhood. I hugged my father goodbye, but the embrace was stiff, no longer as warm as before. "Drive safe, son," he said in a lower voice. Beverly waved from the door, her smile still plastered on her face. I drove back to Austin carrying a tangle of emotions: anger, confusion, and growing suspicion. The feeling that the supermarket encounter was not just a simple coincidence, as my father had tried to insist. The whole way home I replayed his reactions in my mind. The tension, the hasty denial. "What are you hiding, Dad?" I whispered into the night wind. That night sleep evaded me again, and the unease kept expanding, like a spreading shadow pulling me into a vortex I wasn't ready to face. After the visit to my father, I returned to my daily routine in Austin, trying to bury myself in work to drive away the lingering unease that smoldered in my heart like an unhealed wound. The following days passed in the familiar grind, waking at dawn, brewing strong black coffee, then sitting for hours in front of the computer editing photos for clients. As a freelance photographer, I mostly shot portraits and small events, local weddings, family photo sessions, occasionally street photography for online magazines. The work kept me busy, and in those rare moments when I was completely focused on the frame, I could temporarily forget the heavy thoughts weighing on my mind. I wandered the sun-drenched, windy streets of Austin, my camera dangling from my neck, trying to capture everyday moments. A child grinning widely with a melting ice cream cone, a couple embracing under the canopy of an ancient oak tree, or the sunset painting Ladybird Lake in shades of red. But no matter how hard I tried, the image of the woman from the supermarket still lingered. Whenever I paused to rest, I saw her again. Her slender figure, her sharp eyes, interwoven with memories of my mother. Why did Dad react so strangely? I wondered, and that suspicion made each day feel heavier. One evening, while I was working alone in the quiet apartment, an unexpected knock at the door made me freeze, wondering who could possibly be visiting at this hour. The clock showed 8 in the evening. Outside, Austin was already pitch dark, with only the chirping of insects drifting through the window. I was sitting at my desk, editing a wedding photo series, the radiant smiles on the bride and groom's faces, something I always envied because my own life lacked it. The knock sounded 3 times, clear and insistent, making my heart beat faster. "Who is it?" I thought, standing up with some hesitation. My apartment was in a quiet suburban area, rarely receiving unexpected visitors, especially at night. I turned off the desk lamp to see better through the window, but there was only darkness. With a touch of nervousness, I approached the door, my fists clenched. "Who's out there?" I called loudly, my voice slightly trembling but trying to stay calm. I opened the door and froze in shock upon seeing the very woman I had encountered in the supermarket the previous week standing right in front of me, her eyes calm but serious under the dim porch light. She wore a long wool coat, her hair neatly tied back, and that air of elegance still emanated from every gesture. My heart seemed to stop. Blood rushed to my ears with a roaring sound. "What are you doing here?" I stammered, my body stiff as if frozen. This wasn't a dream. She was really standing there on my doorstep. The accumulated unease exploded into a mix of fear and curiosity. Did she know who I was? How had she found my address? Questions swirled in my head, leaving me standing like a statue. The woman said she had something important to discuss, her voice calm and resolute, prompting me, despite my confusion, to politely invite her in. "I won't take much of your time, Aaron," she said, calling my name naturally, which made me startle. She knew my name? I stepped back, opening the door wider, and she entered with confident poise, as if familiar with the place. My small living room suddenly felt even more cramped under her presence. I gestured toward the sofa, my voice trembling. "Please have a seat. Would you like something to drink? Water or coffee?" She shook her head lightly and sat down with a serious demeanor. I sat opposite her, my hands clasped tightly to suppress the shaking. The atmosphere was so tense that I could clearly hear my own heartbeat pounding. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice lower than intended. As soon as she sat down, her first words left me reeling. She introduced herself as Catherine Brooks and revealed that she was my mother's identical twin sister, Elizabeth Collins. Those words exploded in my mind like a bomb. "You're my mother's identical twin?" I repeated, my voice breaking, feeling as if the floor were sinking beneath my feet. My mother had never mentioned any siblings, let alone a twin. I sat speechless, staring at her, trying to spot the similarities. And yes, now I saw them clearly. The face, the build, even the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. But the voice, the demeanor, everything else was different, like two versions of the same person. My heart raced wildly. Cold sweat broke out. Was this real? Or some kind of scam? Catherine explained that after our chance encounter at the supermarket, she had quietly hired someone to investigate my background because the resemblance felt too uncanny to be random. "I looked at you and saw my sister, Elizabeth. Your eyes, the way you called out Mom. It was something I couldn't ignore," she said, her voice calm but laced with emotion. The investigation confirmed that I was indeed her sister's biological son. She spoke slowly, detail by detail. She had hired a private detective to follow me right after the supermarket meeting, obtained footage from security cameras, cross-referenced public records, and traced back to my birth certificate. Each detail she mentioned felt like a knife slicing into memories I had tried to bury for years. I sat motionless in my chair, listening as my mind spun, as if my entire life were being peeled apart layer by layer right before my eyes. Every word she said cut into my memories. I sat there listening, my mind reeling. "How can you be sure?" I asked, my voice trembling. She smiled sadly. "I have proof, Aaron. But more importantly, my intuition tells me so." Catherine continued to reveal truths I had never known. My mother had actually been born into a wealthy, prominent family with a life of privilege. Elizabeth was born in a grand mansion in Houston to parents who were powerful business people. We grew up with everything: prestigious schools, trips to Europe, a future all planned out, she recounted, her voice lowering. I sat stunned, feeling as if the world were collapsing. My mother had told me stories of an orphaned, impoverished childhood, tales she shared by the fireside about struggling on her own from a young age. Now what? It had all been lies? My throat felt dry. Tears welled up. "Why didn't my mother ever tell me about this?" I whispered. In her youth, Elizabeth had blindly fallen in love with my father, Frank, and eloped, abandoning her family to follow him, severing all ties to her past. She met Frank in college, fell madly in love, and chose love over family. She left one night without goodbye, only leaving a letter saying she wanted to live freely, Catherine said, pain evident in her eyes. Her departure had been a devastating shock to the maternal family, shattering trust to the point that they chose not to search for her, treating her as lost forever. Our parents were so heartbroken they refused to even mention her name again. We thought she was dead, or at least gone forever. I sat there, my hands trembling, trying to process the information. My mother, a wealthy heiress, running away for love. It explained her extreme simplicity, but it also pained me because of the lies. I was speechless, realizing my mother's true background was completely different from the orphaned, poor childhood she had described. In my memories, her voice still echoed clearly from those nights she lay beside me, low and slow. Mom was orphaned young, with no one to rely on. That's why I value family more than anything. Back then, I believed every word. Now, looking back, I didn't know if it was a truth told incompletely or a part of the story she had deliberately hidden. A sense of betrayal crept in, not intense but persistent, as if those familiar memories had suddenly lost their foundation. Yet at the same time, I felt sorrow for my mother. Perhaps she had chosen that version not to deceive me, but to bury a past she herself lacked the courage to face, and to protect me from the consequences she had endured. Catherine Brooks said she could not ignore the last remaining bloodline of her sister, and coming to me was something she felt she had to do. "You are my nephew, Aaron. I can't let you live without knowing your roots." She expressed her hope that one day I would return to acknowledge my true origins, not for the inheritance, but to understand the life of my late mother. "The Brooks family has a long history, and Elizabeth was part of it," You deserve to know the truth." Faced with those words, I was both shocked and confused, admitting that I needed time to think before making any decisions. "I don't know what to say. This is too sudden," I said, my voice faltering. Catherine respected that, leaving her business card before quietly departing without another word. She stood, lightly touching my shoulder. "Call me when you're ready." Then she left, leaving the apartment in absolute silence. I stood alone in the room, realizing my life had just taken a completely different turn, one I was utterly unprepared for. My heart pounded, my mind chaotic with 1,000 questions. Who was my mother really? What did my father know? And now, what should I do? That anticipation reached its peak like a storm about to break. Catherine Brooks's business card lay on the table, its embossed lettering elegant and the phone number glinting under the desk lamp. I picked it up, turning it over and over, as if it were the key to an unfamiliar world. That night I couldn't sleep, lying awake in bed as memories of my mother flooded in like a tide. She had told me about her orphaned childhood, the days she wandered scraping together a living, her voice warm and full of resilience. Now what? Was it all a lie? I felt betrayed, yet also heartbroken. If Catherine was telling the truth, how much had my mother sacrificed to leave behind a life of wealth? And my father, did he know? His sharp reaction in Sugarland kept replaying in my mind, making me suspect he was hiding something significant. The following days passed in endless turmoil. I tried to bury myself in photography work, shooting a local wedding, editing portraits for clients, but everything felt half-hearted. Every time I held the camera, I saw my mother through the lens, her beaming smile in the kitchen, her tight embrace after a tiring day at work. But now those memories felt distorted, like a photo edited incorrectly. I wandered the streets of Austin, hoping the familiar atmosphere would calm me, but it was useless. During the day, I kept myself busier, jogging along the Colorado River, stopping at a cafe for a latte, even trying a date with a girl from an app, but the conversation only skimmed the surface, weather and work, never touching the chaos inside me. At night, sleep came in fits filled with strange dreams. My mother in a glamorous evening gown, fleeing a lavish mansion, clutching a small suitcase, turning back with sad eyes. I woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, wondering if I should call Catherine. "What's waiting for me ahead?" I muttered, staring at the business card on the nightstand. Fear mixed with curiosity like a ticking time bomb. I knew that if I didn't act, this unease would consume me. After days of internal struggle, on a gently sunny morning in Austin, I finally took the initiative and dialed the number on Catherine Brooks' card. My hands shook as I pressed the buttons, my heart pounding like a war drum. The phone rang twice, then her voice came through, calm as before. "Aaron, I've been waiting for your call." Not a hint of surprise, as if she knew I would reach out. "I want to discover my roots," I said, my voice breaking with emotion. She didn't ask why, simply replying, "I'll come pick you up today. Get ready." I hung up, a surge of anticipation rising. I packed a few simple outfits, slipping my camera into the bag, my unbreakable habit like a protective shield, and waited. Just a few hours later, a luxurious black car pulled up in front of my apartment. Catherine stepped out, dressed elegantly, a faint smile on her lips. "Are you ready, Aaron?" she asked, her voice warmer than I expected. I nodded, got in the car, and we left Austin, heading toward Houston, where the Brooks family mansion awaited. Before leaving Austin, I had thought long and hard about whether to tell my father what I had just learned. In the end, I chose silence. Not because I trusted him, but because I didn't yet know the full truth. Part of me feared that if I spoke too soon, he would try to stop me. After all, my mother had abandoned her maternal family to follow him, and that past had never been discussed calmly. I needed to know who my mother really was, what she had left behind, and why she had hidden an entire identity for all those years. Only when I grasped the full truth could I confront my father without being led into another version of the story. The drive lasted about 2 hours, but to me it felt endless. We made small talk about Texas weather, my photography work, but I sensed an underlying tension. Catherine shared a few childhood memories of my mother. The identical twins being mischievous, running around the vast garden. Elizabeth was always the dreamer, loving books and painting, she said, her voice softening. I listened, trying to imagine my mother in that privileged life, but it felt too alien compared to the simple woman in my memories. The closer we got, the greater my unease grew. How will the family receive me? I asked. Catherine gazed out the window. They're not the type to open up easily. But your family, blood, at the very least, that can't be denied. Her words offered little comfort, only making my heart beat faster. As the car turned onto a private road, the mansion came into view, a grand, opulent villa with classical architecture, towering iron gates, lush gardens, and a sparkling fountain under the sun. Yet the atmosphere was cold, like a palace devoid of human warmth. I immediately felt the invisible distance between myself and this place. Me, the ordinary Austin guy in a worn t-shirt, stepping into a world of wealth and power. The car stopped at the main entrance, and my grandparents, Henry and Margaret Brooks, emerged to greet us. They were in their 70s, impeccably dressed. He in a gray suit, she wearing a gleaming pearl necklace. They welcomed me with composed demeanor, their eyes more scrutinizing than emotional. No eager embraces or hugs, as I had fancifully imagined in wild dreams. "Welcome home, Aaron," Henry said, his voice deep and formal, shaking my hand mechanically. Margaret smiled faintly. "Come inside. We'll talk." No tears, no warm hugs, just cool politeness. I followed them in, my feet stepping on polished marble floors, gazing up at the soaring ceiling with its magnificent crystal chandelier. The living room was vast, with premium leather furniture and art pieces on the walls, but the air felt stifling, as if everything was arranged to display power rather than affection. Catherine patted my shoulder. "They need time to adjust, Aaron. Just like you." I nodded, but loneliness surged within me. This was blood family, yet so utterly foreign. That evening, the entire extended family was summoned, and a heavy atmosphere enveloped the grand dining room. The long table was covered in pristine white linen with gleaming silver cutlery and exquisite dishes prepared by a private chef. Wagyu beef, chicken salad, and French wine. About 24 people sat around it, uncles, aunts, cousins, all impeccably dressed, exuding authority from the family businesses they ran. I sat next to Catherine, my heart pounding, feeling like an outsider. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the clinking of cutlery on plates. Then Catherine stood, her voice clear. "Everyone, today I want to introduce Aaron Collins, the son of my sister Elizabeth, who left us years ago." Her words exploded like a bomb. Murmurs immediately arose, laced with disdain, sarcasm, and unhidden reproach. An older uncle raised an eyebrow. "The son of the traitor? And now he shows up here?" A female cousin smirked. "I hope he's not like his mother." I sat there, my face burning, trying to stay calm, but my hands trembling under the table. Sitting in the midst of the dining table, I quietly observed and realized that Elizabeth's family was powerful, wealthy, and disciplined, but also cold and judgmental. They spoke of business, stocks, and multi-million-dollar deals as everyday matters. But their glances at me were full of suspicion. There was no warm welcome, only probing questions. "What do you do in Austin? What do you already know about this family?" I answered briefly, but every word felt scrutinized. I couldn't understand why such a family harbored such deep resentment, to the point of nearly denying my mother's existence entirely. They spoke of her as a stain. "Elizabeth nearly bankrupted us," one uncle said, his voice full of bitterness. I sat there, choking back emotion, feeling as if I were in a courtroom rather than a family dinner. The anticipation built like a string stretched to its limit, about to snap. After dinner, I sought out Catherine to get answers, no longer hiding my confusion and inner conflict. We sat in the private study, surrounded by towering bookshelves and the scent of aged wood. "Why do they hate my mother so much?" I asked, my voice trembling. Catherine sighed, looking at me with pity. There's a part of the story you don't know yet, Aaron. She explained that before eloping with Frank. Elizabeth had stolen $25 million from the family company's funds to start her new life. That act had plunged the company into a severe crisis for a long time, nearly causing bankruptcy and affecting hundreds of employees. She thought it was the way to freedom, but to us it was betrayal, Catherine said, her voice heavy with sadness. Although the company eventually recovered thanks to Henry's efforts, the act became an unhealable rift, leading the family to completely sever ties with Elizabeth. Many family members had never forgiven her, carrying the resentment for years and viewing her departure as an unforgivable betrayal. They saw her as not just leaving but stealing the family's future, Catherine explained. I listened, my heart tightening. I fell into deep inner conflict, realizing that my mother was both a victim of blind love and someone who had deeply hurt her own family. My mother, the one who sacrificed for me, also a thief? I remembered the hard times of my childhood, her saving every penny, never having extra. If she had taken such a large sum, why were we still poor? Or had she hidden it to protect us? That truth distorted the cherished childhood memories I held dear. No longer pure as before, the evenings she told stories, the warm hugs, all now tinged with doubt. For the first time, I understood that my mother's past was far more complex than I had ever known. I left the study, my mind in turmoil, feeling as if the storm had finally arrived, sweeping me into a vortex of secrets and pain. My feet felt heavy as I walked through the long, echoing hallway of the mansion, the sound of my footsteps reverberating like whispers from the past. Catherine saw me to the door, her eyes filled with concern. Be careful, Aaron. The truth sometimes brings unexpected troubles. I nodded but said nothing, simply getting into the car and letting the driver take me back to Austin. Throughout the long drive, the Texas landscape slid past the window. Golden, sun-scorched fields of dry grass, sparsely trafficked stretches of highway. But I barely saw any of it. My mind kept replaying that evening's dinner. The cold stares, the unmasked accusations. They called my mother a traitor, and now I knew why. The $25 million she had stolen. But why? What did she do with it? And where was that money now? The questions gnawed at me like a wound slowly bleeding. Leaving the mansion and returning to my small apartment in Austin that night, I could hardly sleep. My thoughts dragged back to the maternal family gathering and the resentful glares that still haunted me. I lay in bed staring at the mottled ceiling, listening to the night wind whispering through the window cracks. Everything here was so familiar. The camera lying haphazardly on the table, stacks of test prints piled up. But now, it all felt strangely alien. I thought about Catherine's account of the $25 million my mother had taken when she eloped, and the unease grew sharper like a balloon about to burst. $25 million. The figure echoed in my head, unimaginably large. My mother, the simple woman who saved every penny to buy me school supplies, how could she have done that? I clearly remembered her teaching me, money isn't everything, son. What matters is living honestly. Now what? Whom had she been honest with? The Brooks family or us? That doubt kept me tossing and turning, cold sweat breaking out despite the cool Austin night. I turned on the light, sat up, and picked up the framed photo of my mother on the nightstand. She smiled kindly in the old picture, but now that smile seemed to hide something profound. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" I whispered, tears welling up. That night stretched on endlessly, every moment an internal battle. Childhood memories surfaced vividly like an old film being rewound. An ordinary life, a modest mother who was frugal, never letting me feel we were shielded by wealth. We lived in a small house in Sugar Land with worn furniture and simple meals. Vegetable soup, weekend grilled meat if we were lucky. My mother worked at a grocery store, coming home late with tired feet, yet always smiling and hugging me tightly. "Mom got a great deal today," she would say, holding a bag of discounted produce. I remembered birthdays when she made cakes from scratch with flour, decorating them with reused candles. No expensive gifts, no trips, just warm love. My father worked as a builder, earning a modest wage, and we always had to budget carefully. "We're poor but happy," my mother often said gently. Now thinking back, if she had taken $25 million, why didn't she use it to improve our lives? Why not buy a bigger house or send me to a better school? The question bored into me, causing pain. Had she hidden it to protect me from something? Or was the money gone? I wondered why, if Elizabeth had once held such a vast sum, enough to change everything, our life remained merely adequate, and why she never mentioned it even once, even in our hardest times. And why she never spoke of it, not even once, even during the most difficult moments. I got up and paced the cramped room, trying to piece together the scattered fragments in my mind. My mother had never boasted, never shopped extravagantly or dreamed of a different life. Even when her illness worsened, she refused treatment, gently saying she was fine and that I shouldn't worry about money. Now looking back, that calm no longer seemed simple, but like a deliberate choice, a secret she carried to her grave. But now, with the truth from Catherine, everything grew murky. That money, millions of dollars, could have changed everything. Why did she choose to live in hardship? Or had she used it for something else? The question became more tormenting when I thought about the time of Elizabeth's death and how our family's circumstances changed inexplicably. No more financial pressure, a series of major business decisions, and sudden stability that arrived too abruptly. After the funeral, my father quickly remarried Beverly, and within months he started his own construction company, invested in real estate, bought a new car, even traveled to Europe. "Dad just got lucky with the timing," he once said, grinning widely. But now it seemed too sudden. From struggling to comfortable without a sum like $25 million, how was it possible? And my mother died right at that moment. My heart tightened as the thought flashed through my mind. No, it couldn't be. But the unease grew, like a shadow swallowing reason. Carrying a chain of unanswerable questions, the next morning I decided to confront my father and get clear answers. I woke early as the Austin sun was just rising, brewed strong black coffee to stay alert, then drove to Sugarland unannounced. The whole way my heart raced, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Today I have to know the full story, I told myself, but the anticipation made me sweat. I knocked at 8 in the morning, and my early arrival clearly surprised Frank and Beverly, as if they hadn't expected this visit. My father opened the door, still sleepy-eyed in rumpled pajamas. "Aaron? Why so early? Is something wrong?" Beverly appeared behind him, hair tousled, forcing a smile. "Come in, let me make coffee." They led me to the kitchen, but tension filled the air immediately. I could sense it. They were on guard. I sat at the familiar dining table, once filled with memories of my mother, and got straight to the point. I told them I knew about her true background and asked about the money she had taken, where it was now, and why she never mentioned it to me. "Dad, I've met the maternal family. They said Mom was a wealthy heiress who eloped with you and took $25 million. Where is that money now? Why did Mom never tell me?" My words landed like a bomb, and the kitchen fell suddenly silent. Frank reacted almost instantly. His face paled, his hands clenching the coffee cup. "What are you talking about?" His voice rose sharply. "They've lied to you, Aaron. That family has resented your mother for years. They made it up to pull you to their side, to drive a wedge between us. There was no money." He spoke quickly, urgently, as if any delay would cause everything to collapse. His eyes avoided mine, constantly glancing aside. Beverly immediately jumped in, her voice sweet but laced with subtle sarcasm. "Oh, Aaron, you're still as naive as ever." She shook her head. "Rich people always have an agenda. They want to control you, make you believe you belong with them. Don't let them lead you with fabricated stories." I didn't argue. I simply set down my coffee cup and looked my father straight in the eye. "Then explain it to me," I said slowly. "Why, in just 2 years after Mom died, did your life change so drastically?" Both fell silent. "New company, new car, trips you never considered before," I continued. "Where did it all come from? It can't just be simple luck." Frank cleared his throat as if pulling himself together. I just invested more wisely, he said. The market picked up, a few big contracts came at the right time. Things went better than expected. Nothing more. Don't overthink it. But his voice trembled slightly at the end. He stared at the table instead of me. Beverly forced a stiff smile, her hands gripping the chair arms. I turned to Beverly. What do you think? I asked. You live here, watching everything change day by day. Doesn't it seem strange? She paused briefly, then quickly regained composure. Your father got better at business. What's surprising about that? She replied. Men his age often hit a streak of good fortune. You don't live here. How could you understand everything? I don't live here, I said, my voice lowering. But I lived with my mother for nearly 30 years, and I know she never spent money recklessly. Frank lightly slammed his coffee cup on the table. His voice grew harsh. Enough, Aaron. You're reading too much into this. I won't let you dig up the past. I'm not digging, I replied. I'm just asking. If there's nothing to hide, why are you so tense? Frank looked up at me, his eyes mixing anger and fear. Because you're letting others manipulate your mind, he said. Your mother left that family to be with me. They've never forgiven us. Why do you think they're telling you this now? I answered. I don't know, but I do know one thing. My mother never lived like someone with money. Never. Frank stood abruptly. He cut me off, then turned to me. That's enough. You should go. Clearly you're not thinking straight. I stood as well. Maybe I'm not thinking straight, I said. But I'm certain of one thing. There are things you haven't told me, and I'll find out on my own. The kitchen air was stifling, like a bomb about to explode. I stood, said nothing more, just nodded goodbye. I'm leaving. Thanks for the coffee. They watched me go, their eyes filled with worry, but neither tried to stop me. I drove back to Austin carrying a heavy feeling that I had just touched a part of the truth Frank and Beverly were determined to keep hidden. My heart raced, anticipation surging. This was not the end. That money, my mother's death, how were they connected? I knew I had to dig deeper, but fear crept in. The truth might destroy everything that remained. The I-10 highway stretched out before me with withered grass fields under the Texas afternoon sun, but I paid no attention. My mind spun with images of my father, his face pale, his voice trembling as he denied everything, and Beverly with her forced smile. Lucky in business, he had said, but how could it be such a coincidence? After my mother's death, his life changed dramatically. A new company, luxury cars, trips, all like magic. But what magic comes without a price? I gripped the steering wheel tightly, sweat beading on my palms. My mother died in a car accident. The doctors concluded she lost control on a slippery road due to rain. At the time, I accepted that explanation without question. But now, thinking back, everything felt off. My mother was healthy, a careful driver, rarely in a hurry. And that accident happened right when the family's fortunes began to turn inexplicably lucky. The coincidence sent a chill down my spine, as if some invisible presence was following close behind, constantly reminding me that my mother's death might not be as simple as I had once believed. Back at the apartment, I collapsed onto the sofa, my mind still in turmoil. With the growing suspicions after the confrontation, I became increasingly convinced that Elizabeth's death was not as straightforward as Frank had claimed. He said it was a random accident, but now everything fit together like a dark picture. I remembered the funeral. My father cried, but quickly regained composure, even seeming happier once Beverly appeared. She, the vibrant younger woman, slipped into his life just months later. I once thought he was lonely, but now perhaps they had been together even before. The thought made me nauseous. I turned on the computer and searched again for records of my mother's accident online, but found only vague details. A collision on the highway, no direct witnesses. I needed evidence. That night, sleep evaded me, filled only with fitful dreams. My mother screaming in the car, my father watching from afar with a cold smile. I woke in the middle of the night, heart pounding, and decided, I had to tell Catherine. She was the only one who could help. The next morning I called Catherine, my voice trembling as I recounted the entire meeting with Frank and Beverly, along with the growing inconsistencies about the $25 million and the family's sudden changes. Aunt Catherine, my dad denied everything, but he was so tense, and his life changed after Mom died. Too suddenly. I think it's connected to her death. Catherine listened over the phone, her voice calm but laced with worry. Aaron, you're right. We need to investigate. Come see me right away. I drove to Houston, my heart racing the whole way. When I met her at the Brooks Company office, a gleaming glass high-rise, I detailed everything. My father's sharp reactions, Beverly's sarcastic remarks, and how they dodged questions about the money. Catherine sat behind her large desk, her eyes sharp. I believe you, Aaron. My sister wasn't the type to give up easily. We'll find the truth. Catherine didn't hesitate for a second. Right in front of me, she pulled out her phone and made a call, her voice so resolute it was chilling. I need the best team. Investigate Frank Collins and Beverly. Call history, finances, every trace from 2 years ago. Keep it discreet, no leaks. I sat there quietly watching every word, my heart beating faster with each pause in the conversation. When she hung up, Catherine looked at me and said briefly, "They'll work in silence. We can't just suspect. We need irrefutable evidence." The waiting days that followed felt like silent torture. I returned to Austin, trying to bury myself in work as if everything were normal. I took on a local event shoot, moving through crowds, raising the camera out of habit. But each time I pressed the shutter, my hands shook slightly, and I realized I was viewing everything through the lens while my mind was far away. The investigators traced phone bills, backed up emails, and hotel bookings, revealing that Frank and Beverly had been in frequent contact and meeting while Elizabeth was still alive, with many overlapping times and locations. The first report arrived after a week, hundreds of calls between my father and Beverly starting 3 years earlier, when my mother was still healthy. They met in suburban Sugarland hotels, secretive evening appointments. I read the report with trembling hands. Meetings coincided with days Elizabeth worked late. Anticipation surged. My father had been cheating with Beverly? I felt sick, but Catherine comforted me over the phone. The financial investigation uncovered that Frank had once consulted an investment advisor about using a large sum, exactly $25 million. But Elizabeth refused to sign off. Her personal notes showed she declined to change their lifestyle to maintain stability for me. In Elizabeth's personal computer and draft emails, there was an unfinished will, along with confirmation from a lawyer that she had inquired about procedures to leave all assets in her name to me. The investigators retrieved data from my mother's old laptop. She had emailed a lawyer 3 months before the accident. I want to set up a will, everything to my son. The draft will read, all assets, including the secret fund, to Aaron Collins. She intended to leave the $25 million to me? My heart tightened. She knew my father wanted the money and she was trying to protect me. Location data, schedules, and indirect witness statements showed Frank and Beverly were present and acting suspiciously around the time of Elizabeth's accident, coinciding with the period she was preparing to finalize her asset arrangements. The investigators checked GPS from my father's phone. He was near the accident scene, not at work as he claimed. Beverly had booked a hotel room a few miles away. One witness, a passing driver, indirectly reported, saw a couple arguing on the roadside before the crash. It all fit. They were there, and my mother died right after planning to complete the will. When the full report arrived, both Catherine and I were devastated. I erupted in rage, realizing Elizabeth had been betrayed and murdered while Catherine grieved for failing to prevent the tragedy. We met in her office, the thick report on the table. I read it with shaking hands. Affair, arguments over money, presence at the scene. They killed my mother, I shouted, tears streaming, pounding the table. Catherine hugged me, her voice choked. I'm sorry, Aaron. I should have found her sooner. She was in pain, eyes red, the identical twins. She felt my mother's suffering. Rage made me want to rush to Sugarland immediately, but Catherine held me back. We need the law. The anticipation had turned to fury like a spreading fire. Catherine immediately summoned the family's private lawyers, handing over all evidence and demanding criminal charges while requesting the reopening of Elizabeth's death case. The law office, a glass high-rise in Houston, was packed. Top lawyers, investigators, and us. She spoke decisively. Sue Frank and Beverly for premeditated murder. Reopen the accident. It wasn't an accident. The lawyer nodded, reviewing the evidence. We have enough to convince the court. I sat there, heart pounding, feeling like I was in a crime movie. Frank and Beverly were summoned for questioning. At first, both evaded and denied, clinging to the old story. We followed through the lawyers. My father insisted it was just an accident. Beverly smirked, saying I'd been fooled. They performed well, but the mounting evidence made them tense. The breakthrough came when Beverly changed her stance, admitting her role in the plan and providing key additional evidence in exchange for leniency consideration. In the second questioning session, she cried, I didn't intend to kill, but Frank pressured me. Here are the messages and recordings. She handed over an old phone, texts between them. We have to get rid of Elizabeth before she finalizes the will. With Beverly's cooperating testimony and the new evidence, the case shifted dramatically, cornering Frank with no escape, while I realized the truth I sought was finally emerging. My father collapsed, weakly denying, but the proof was overwhelming. I sat with Catherine, tears rolling down. Mom was killed for the money. The anticipation was now pain, but also the first step toward justice. The case unfolded, and I knew the journey was far from over. The days that followed passed in a chaotic swirl of emotions. Anger intertwined with sadness, faint glimmers of hope amid fear. Catherine and the legal team worked tirelessly, preparing the case file for trial. I returned to Austin, trying to live normally, shooting photos, editing, running, but everything felt tasteless. Each night I lay awake, imagining my mother in her final moments, driving in the rain, perhaps thinking about the will, about protecting me from that $25 million. Did she suspect my father? Did she see Beverly as a threat? The thought pained me deeply, like a wound that refused to heal. The trial was held publicly, drawing massive media and public attention due to its involvement of a wealthy family. A death once ruled an accident and secrets hidden for years. The Houston courthouse was packed. Reporters crowded outside the doors with cameras, curious onlookers whispered among themselves, and the atmosphere was heavy, like a real-life crime drama. I entered the courtroom, heart pounding, gripping Catherine's hand tightly. She patted my shoulder. We'll win, Aaron. For Elizabeth. My father sat at the defendant's table, looking older than ever. Hair completely white, face gaunt, eyes averted. Beverly beside him, makeup impeccable but expression tense, no longer wearing her familiar sarcastic smile. I sat in the front row, feeling as if trapped in a nightmare. The judge banged the gavel, the trial began, and the courtroom suddenly fell silent, broken only by the rustle of papers and lawyers' whispers. Media outside was live streaming, and I knew all of Texas was watching, a case tied to money. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a strong, resolute voice, stood to present the chain of evidence in chronological order. The years-long affair between Frank and Beverly, the financial motive centered on the $25 million, my mother's draft will, phone location data, and preparatory actions before Elizabeth's death. He started from the beginning. Defendants Frank Collins and accomplice Beverly engaged in an extramarital affair for 3 years prior to victim Elizabeth Collins's death. Evidence from phone records and emails shows secretive meetings where they discussed a future, one without Elizabeth. The large screen displayed messages. We have to get rid of her before she takes all the money. My heart tightened seeing them. Cold, calculated words. The prosecutor continued, the motive is clear. The $25 million Elizabeth took when eloping from the Brooks family. Frank wanted to seize it, but Elizabeth refused, and she was drafting a will leaving everything to her son, Aaron. He displayed the draft. The prosecutor pressed on, connecting location data. On the night of the accident, Frank and Beverly were near the scene, not at home as initially claimed. They argued with the victim roadside per indirect witness accounts. Elizabeth's car lost control, not randomly but due to tampering. He presented traffic camera photos, hotel records, and recordings from Beverly's phone. My father's whispered voice, "Do it before it's too late." The courtroom buzzed. The judge banged the gavel for order. The evidence pieced together showed Elizabeth's death was no random mishap, but the result of a calculated plan to gain control of the assets. The prosecutor concluded, "This is premeditated murder for money and love. Justice must be served." I sat there, hands trembling, anticipation peaking. The evidence was overwhelming, yet seeing my father bow his head, I felt both rage and pity. Catherine squeezed my hand. "Stay strong, Aaron." The trial dragged on. Defense lawyers tried to dismiss it. Mere coincidences, no direct proof. But everyone could see they were losing ground. Under the weight of the dossier and inexplicable contradictions in testimony, Frank gradually lost control, no longer able to deny plausibly. He sat in the witness chair, face ashen under the courtroom lights, voice shaking under relentless questioning. "Why were you near the scene? Why emails discussing the money?" He stammered, "I don't remember." But the prosecutor pressed, "You remember because you planned it." Frank bowed his head, sweating profusely, and finally admitted to causing Elizabeth's death to seize the enormous sum and legitimize his relationship with Beverly. "I didn't intend to kill her, but she wouldn't give up the money. We just wanted freedom." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged the gavel. I sat frozen, tears streaming. The man who taught me to ride a bike, who held me crying when Mom was ill, now confessing to murder. The pain tore through me like a knife plunged deep. Beverly also confirmed her role as accomplice, admitting complicity while emphasizing her early cooperation with investigators and requesting leniency. She stood, voice choked but calculated. "I only helped Frank. I wasn't the mastermind. I've cooperated, provided evidence. Please show mercy," she detailed. "Frank pressured me, but I regret it." In that moment, Frank froze completely, eyes lifeless as he realized his partner had chosen to save herself. He stared at Beverly in horror, mouth agape but speechless. The composure he'd maintained throughout the trial crumbled. Frank revealed raw panic and helplessness, understanding his final calculations had been shattered by his closest ally. He shouted, "How dare you pin it all on me?" But the judge warned him. I watched him, heart aching. My father, once the family pillar, now isolated in court. Before the jury, Frank was forced to confess he had caused Elizabeth's death to seize the vast sum and legitimize his affair with Beverly. He recounted details. "We argued roadside. I pushed her car. Then the accident happened." The courtroom fell dead silent. The public outside buzzed. The jury deliberated on the degree of crime, motive, consequences, and each defendant's attitude. They retired, and the courtroom air grew suffocatingly tense. I sat gripping my hands, memories of my mother flooding back, her smile teaching me photography, her hugs on rainy nights. She died for money, $25 million she never wanted to use. The anticipation was now waiting for justice, but also boundless sorrow. The jury found Frank guilty of premeditated murder, conspiracy to murder, and concealing a crime, sentencing him to life imprisonment without parole, ending any appeal possibility. The judge read, "Defendant Frank Collins, for selfish motive and cruel acts, is sentenced to life imprisonment." Frank collapsed in his chair, face pallid, lifeless. Beverly was deemed a secondary accomplice. Due to voluntary confession, investigation cooperation, and providing decisive evidence, she received a 5-year suspended sentence, 3 years probation, with supervision obligations and contact restrictions. Defendant Beverly, for cooperation, receives a reduced sentence, the judge said. She exhaled in relief, but her eyes avoided mine. As the verdict was read, the courtroom fell into heavy silence, closing a prolonged case with immense loss. The gavel banged, people rose, but the air remained stifling. Media rushed out, camera flashes blazing, but to me the world blurred. I left the courtroom quietly, feeling neither relief nor satisfaction. Only emptiness, as the truth was finally exposed but could not bring my mother back. Catherine hugged me in the hallway. "Your mother lived her whole life for others," she continued slowly. "And today, you stood up for her. Though nothing can be undone, it still matters." But I only nodded, tears streaming. My mother, the sacrificing woman, died wrongfully. Now my father imprisoned, Beverly free. I stepped into the Houston sunlight, wind brushing my face, but the pain remained. The journey ended, but the scar forever. I drove back to Austin, haunted by trial memories. My father's eyes, Beverly's testimony, the life sentence. Justice prevailed, but at what cost? I pulled over roadside, sobbing uncontrollably, then continued, because Mom would want me to live on. The weeks following the trial passed in a chaotic tangle of emotions, like a prolonged nightmare that refused to end. I returned to Austin, trying to piece together my old life, editing photos for clients, jogging along the Colorado River to chase away thoughts, but everything felt meaningless. Each morning upon waking, I looked at my mother's portrait on the nightstand, and the pain surged anew. She had died wrongfully because of money and betrayal. The media continued to pursue. Reporters called. Articles about the wealthy family murder case spread across the internet. But I shut it all off, locked my doors, and lived like a ghost. Catherine called daily, her voice warm. "Aaron, are you okay? Come to Houston if you need to." I knew she was worried, but I needed time alone to process the truth that my father, the man I had once admired, was a murderer. I remembered old memories, him teaching me to fish by the lake, smiling at my college graduation. Now they were all tainted black, like a ruined photo beyond repair. Sometime after the trial, about 2 months when public attention began to fade, I received a letter from the prison. Frank had proactively requested to meet me. The words in the letter were brief and cold. "Son, I need to see you to talk." My heart tightened. What for? To apologize? Or to blame? I hesitated, but eventually decided to go, needing closure for the old chapter. Catherine learned of it and insisted on coming. "You shouldn't go alone. I'll witness this final meeting between father and son." We drove to the prison on the outskirts of Houston, a grim concrete building with barbed wire fences and an atmosphere as heavy as hell. Security was strict, remove shoes, metal detectors, and finally we sat in the visitation room, thick glass separating us, old telephones for communication. Catherine sat beside me, her hand gripping mine reassuringly, but my heart pounded, anticipation as intense as before the trial. The moment we faced each other, Frank showed no remorse or pleading. His demeanor was cold and rigid, as if still fighting an unfinished battle. He wore an orange prison jumpsuit, his face more gaunt, hair disheveled and completely white, but his eyes remained sharp, filled with resentment. "So my son has come to visit," he said through the phone, his voice flat as if discussing the weather. No tears, no apology, just a chill that sent shivers down my spine. He said the sentence was merely on paper, while what had been taken from him could not be closed with a few years in prison. "Life sentence, huh?" Frank smirked faintly. "That's just a word people use to lull each other to sleep, Aaron. You all took everything from me, freedom, money, my life. You think locking me up here ends it?" His voice was low, never raised, but every word carried raw menace, like a wounded beast still with enough claws to strike back. I sat opposite him, staring through the thick glass, my heart beating harder than usual. In that moment, I understood clearly. The man before me was no longer my father. Frank continued, his voice eerily even, as if recounting a story unrelated to himself. "Beverly betrayed me. You and that aunt of yours did too," he said, eyes icy. "Elizabeth betrayed me first. She hid the money, wouldn't let me touch it. I just wanted freedom. What's wrong with that?" He tilted his head as if questioning himself. Frank sneered. "The Brooks family, a bunch of arrogant rich folks. They think they're better than me. Elizabeth left because of them, then hid the money. I was just taking back what should have been mine. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Catherine beside me had gone visibly pale, but she said nothing, as if knowing any rebuttal would only please him more. Frank turned fully to me. "You chose their side," he said slowly. "You turned your back on your father. You're the one who destroyed me, son." His eyes flashed with something dangerous, not anger but cold hatred, thickening the air in the visitation room. I took a deep breath before speaking. "I didn't come here to argue," I said, keeping my voice steady, "or to seek forgiveness. I came for closure. Mom died because of what you did, and from today, I'll live without you in my life." A brief silence passed. Frank stared at me, his eyes darkening as if memorizing every word. "Don't think it ends here," he said softly. "Some consequences can't be caged behind bars." He leaned forward, voice lowering further. "Remember this, Aaron. Some things aren't imprisoned, and when the consequences come, you'll understand." His words, without needing to be shouted, were enough to send a chill down my spine. Right then, a guard approached, placing a hand on Frank's shoulder. He stood, but before being led away, he turned for one final look at me, flashing a twisted smile devoid of any regret. Catherine held my hand tightly as the door closed. "Don't let his words scare you," she said softly, though her voice trembled slightly. "All he has left is resentment to cling to." I didn't respond, but deep down I knew this meeting wasn't an end. It was a warning. Leaving the prison, Catherine admitted she didn't believe Frank had let go and advised me to never let my guard down. "He still resents you, Aaron. Be careful. Change locks, call police if anything's off. Don't think prison ends it." We drove back in heavy silence. My father's words haunted me the whole way, like a pursuing shadow. News of the trial reached the maternal family, gradually shifting their attitude toward me, from caution to acceptance. Uncles and aunts called, voices more polite. "Aaron, you're part of the family." Though differing opinions lingered, some still whispered I was the traitor's son. The family officially welcomed me as the legitimate heir, not out of emotion, but because the law had confirmed it. Grandfather Henry sent a letter. "You have inheritance rights. Come to Houston, we'll discuss." I hesitated, but knew it was a new opportunity. I completely left my old life in Austin, moving to an entirely new environment where relationships, daily rhythms, and standards were all different. I sold the small apartment, packed my camera and a few mementos of my mother, and relocated to Houston, a luxury apartment in the Brooks family area. The atmosphere changed, from solitude in Austin to family meetings, social gatherings, and scrutinizing glances from everyone. I started a new job within the family business, not a symbolic role, but one with real responsibility, directly tied to outcomes and consequences. I managed part of a real estate project, reading reports, meeting partners, making investment decisions. "You have to prove yourself," Catherine said, and I agreed. It wasn't easy. From freelance photographer to businessman, I learned to wear suits, discuss stocks, and handle pressure from multi-million-dollar figures. My finances stabilized. No more survival worries, but I wasn't allowed to live recklessly or rely on status. I earned a high salary but had to report expenses and attend board meetings. My social standing shifted markedly. Those who once saw me as an outsider were forced to reconsider, though not everyone was pleased. I realized I was living a completely different life, not just wealthier but with clearer boundaries and responsibilities. Mornings in meetings, afternoons reviewing contracts, evenings studying finance, adapting to a hectic but purposeful pace. Though my soul still bore many scars from losses and betrayals, I gradually learned to move forward without letting the past dictate every choice. I understood this new life wasn't a reward for pain, but an opportunity to live differently. More aware, always vigilant against mistakes that had once destroyed an entire family. I looked out the high-rise apartment window at glittering Houston nights and whispered, "Mom, I'll live well." But my father's threat lingered, like a lurking shadow. I changed locks, installed cameras, and lived with caution, knowing that in this world betrayal could come from anywhere. The new journey had begun and I was ready to face it. A year had passed since the trial, and life seemed to have settled down, though the scars remained smoldering with pain. I had grown accustomed to the new rhythm in Houston. Mornings and meetings about the Brooks family's real estate projects, afternoons reviewing financial reports, evenings returning to my modern apartment with its glittering city view. The demanding work helped me forget somewhat. The numbers, contracts, and responsibilities made me feel like I was building something solid, no longer the wandering freelance photographer from Austin. Catherine often visited, bringing pastries and stories about my mother, the mischievous identical twins in their childhood. Warm memories she tried to share to fill the void in me. The Brooks family had accepted me more now, though distant scrutinizing glances still lingered. Life was stable. Financial security, new friends from the business world, even a few casual dates. But in the dead of night, alone, my father's words from prison echoed, "Some consequences can't be caged behind bars." I told myself they were just the empty threats of a defeated man, but that unease hovered like an unresolved curse. For that year, I thought everything had finally closed. But one morning, I woke as usual, in the gentle Houston sunlight filtering through the curtains. Sleep was still fitful, not deep, but enough for me to believe life was finally returning to normal, at least in that moment. The clock showed 6 and I stretched, getting out of bed with familiar routine. Brewing strong black coffee, opening my laptop to check work emails, and turning on the TV for the news while preparing for the day. The apartment was quiet, only the hum of the coffee machine and the local news anchor's voice. I put on a shirt, tied my tie, thinking about the upcoming meeting, a major suburban real estate project where I had to present the investment plan. Life now had rhythm, purpose, and I felt proud for having overcome. From the pain of losing my mother, my father's betrayal, to my new position in the family. But then a breaking news alert interrupted the weather segment. Breaking. A dangerous inmate escaped from federal prison last night. Police are pursuing... I paused, looking up at the screen, and froze as the image revealed was Frank. His face, aged with unkempt beard but eyes still sharp as in court, appeared clearly. Frank Collins, sentenced to life for murdering his wife, is believed to have escaped through a self-dug tunnel. Authorities warn he may be armed and dangerous. My heart seemed to stop. Coffee spilled across the table unnoticed. Impossible. He escaped? After everything? Before I could gather my thoughts, my phone vibrated incessantly on the table. The screen showed Beverly's number, filling me with confusion and alarm. Beverly, the former accomplice, now living freely with a suspended sentence, whom I hadn't contacted since the trial. Why was she calling? After betraying my father for a lighter sentence, she had vanished from my life, living in a small house on the outskirts of Sugar Land. I stared at the ringing screen, heart racing. Though unsure why she was calling, I answered. From the other end came a blood-curdling scream, interrupted pleas for help. "Aaron, help me, he's here. Save me." Then it abruptly cut off, leaving only the cold dial tone. I stood stunned, the phone slipping from my hand, realizing Beverly was in grave danger, and there was no time to hesitate. Frank, had he escaped for revenge? And Beverly his first victim? Fear surged, but survival instinct, honed over the past year, spurred me to act. I immediately called emergency services, voice urgent. "Escapee Frank Collins." Beverly called me for help. He's probably at her house. I provided Beverly's address, the small house in Sugar Land I remembered, and rushed to my car, speeding there in panic. Morning highway traffic was heavy, but I floored it, hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened. The whole drive I replayed the call. That scream, panicked, desperate, like a cry from hell. I called Catherine, voice breaking. "Aunt, Frank escaped." Beverly called me. "I'm heading there now." She panicked. "Stop, Aaron. If you go, he won't spare you. Call the police." But I didn't stop. Anticipation rose like a raging wave, sweeping me in. Arriving, I burst into the wide-open house and witnessed a horrifying scene confirming Beverly had been murdered. The front door was ajar, lights blazing despite the early hour, and the metallic smell of blood assaulted me. I pushed inside the living room and froze. Beverly sprawled on the floor, blood pooling around her, eyes wide in terror. A dagger plunged deep into her chest and the wall smeared with blood, spelling traitor. My heart stopped, legs weakened, but I didn't scream, just stood there, mind reeling. I stammered incoherently, hands shaking as I dialed police again. Officers and forensics arrived soon after, sealing the scene and taking my statement while I was still in shock. They pulled me outside, questioning rapidly. "What did you see? Why are you here?" I recounted the call, the escape news, voice faltering from trauma. The forensics team in white suits photographed, collected evidence, the atmosphere like a horror film. I sat on the curb, knees trembling, trying to breathe. Hours later, preliminary findings confirmed Frank as the killer, with a nationwide manhunt issued that day. "Fingerprints match and the handwriting is his," police said. I nodded, but fear escalated. He was free and I could be next. Back home in Houston, I sank into extreme unease, fully aware I might be the next target now that Frank had nothing left to lose. The high-rise apartment felt like a trap. Security cameras, sturdy locks, but somehow not enough. That night, as the building fell silent, Frank suddenly appeared, carrying hatred and desperation, directly threatening my life. I was in the living room checking for updates on Frank when I heard glass shattering from the back door. My heart leaped. He was here. I didn't panic instinctively, but reacted as prepared, activating the alarm, maintaining safe distance, and buying time for police. The alarm blared throughout the apartment, red lights flashing continuously. I quickly retreated to the safe room, a steel-doored corner I'd prepared long ago, right after the prison visit. Hands shaking but movements practiced, I locked from inside, activating the communication system. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, then a powerful bang on the door. "Open up, Aaron," Frank growled, voice hoarse. "I know you're in there." I watched the camera monitor, his face gaunt and haggard, eyes bloodshot with hatred. In his hand, a knife glinting under the flashing lights, appearing even more distorted and terrifying. I spoke through the intercom, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, stop," I said. "It's over." He let out a raspy laugh, pounding the door again. "Over. You think locking me up ended it? You sided with them. You sold me out." "I didn't sell anyone out," I replied, heart pounding. "I just told the truth. And you chose this path." Frank roared, breathing heavily. "Truth," he snarled. "The truth is I lost everything because of you." I swallowed hard, stalling for time. "Listen to me, Dad," I continued. "Police are on the way. You still have a chance to stop." A brief silence, then a sneer. "I have nothing left to lose," Frank said, voice low and cold. "I just need you to pay for turning me in." He charged the door again, blows more frantic and desperate. The door shook but held. Then from afar, police sirens wailed, faint at first, growing clearer. Frank paused, glancing toward the window, a flash of panic in his eyes. "This isn't over," he muttered, then pounded once more, wildly and erratically. Seconds later, rapid footsteps filled the apartment, accompanied by sharp commands. Frank was subdued right outside the safe room door, the knife clattering to the floor. I stood behind the locked door, hearing the metallic click of handcuffs. Only when everything quieted did I realize I was shaking violently, breathing ragged, as if escaping a nightmare in real life. I opened the door, silently watching as my father was led away, understanding the final ties to the past had been severed, but at a cost too great to ever erase. He turned for one last look at me, eyes full of hatred. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, losing my mother, my father, and now any peace. The storm had ended, but the devastation remained forever. After all the upheavals, I entered a long-term therapy process, directly confronting the trauma, survivor's guilt, and the persistent fear that had haunted me for so long. Catherine introduced me to a psychologist, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Elena Ramirez, whose warm office in downtown Houston was filled with books and greenery. The therapy sessions didn't erase the memories, but they taught me how to place them in their proper context. I gradually understood what belonged to the past and what no longer had the right to control my present. Memories of my mother remained, warm, gentle, full of love, but they no longer dragged me down every night. The guilt of surviving always tormented me. Why was I still alive when my mother was dead, my father imprisoned, and everything around me had collapsed? When I finally voiced it, Elena looked at me gently and said, "You didn't choose who leaves, Aaron, and you didn't choose to stay." She paused briefly before continuing, her voice firm yet warm. "Living on isn't betraying those who are gone. It's the only way they aren't lost again." For the first time in a long while, I understood that moving forward didn't mean forgetting my mother. It meant carrying her love without letting the pain dictate my life. I kept a daily journal recording moments of peace, a successful meeting, a call from Catherine, or simply a morning coffee. Gradually, I slept better, no longer startled by the wind, but the process was long. In the first 6 months, I cried often, anger erupted, but she was patient. Emotions are your allies, not enemies. I remember the 10th session when I smiled for the first time. "Today I didn't have any nightmares." She smiled back. "That's great progress. The wounds are slowly healing." Therapy helped me separate things. The past was a lesson, not a chain. I started going out more, meeting friends, and feeling life no longer weighed so heavily. As my mental state stabilized, I met Lena Harper through work. Our relationship formed slowly through simple conversations, with neither of us playing the role of savior, just two adults choosing to stay together out of respect and peace. Lena was an architect on a Brooks family real estate project. A 28-year-old woman with long brown hair, a warm smile, and a simple style. We met for the first time at a meeting. She presented the designs, confident yet humble. Afterward, we chatted casually about coffee. "What kind do you like?" "I'm obsessed with Italian espresso." The conversation started there. Short lunches talking about books, movies, or Houston's unpredictable weather. Neither of us delved into the past right away. I didn't talk about my mother, father, or the case. She didn't probe my emotional scars. We were just two ordinary people finding harmony in small things. Lena shared her love of painting. I talked about my old photography hobby. The relationship developed slowly, months as friends, then weekend dates, walks in the park, ice cream, laughing over trivial matters. She respected my space, never pushing for painful stories, and I did the same. She had a brief past divorce, but we didn't bond over wounds. Our relationship with Lena progressed gradually and realistically, built on everyday conversations and mutual respect for boundaries, without relying on shared trauma or painful pasts to connect. We talked about the future. "Where do you want to travel?" she asked, and I replied, "Anywhere, as long as it's peaceful with you." No drama, no rescuing, just daily choices to be together. She knew about the case from the news but didn't pry. "When you're ready, tell me." I shared gradually over quiet evenings, and she listened, holding me without pity. The relationship was like a calm river, without storms, healing me naturally. We respected boundaries, private weekends, no control, and that made me feel safe for the first time in years. When we decided to marry, Lena and I chose a simple ceremony with only close loved ones, viewing marriage as a conscious choice for the present and future, not a way to compensate or heal old losses. We held it in the backyard of the Brooks mansion. Catherine insisted on hosting. Only 20 people attended: Catherine, my grandparents, a few close cousins, and Lena's dear friends. No extravagant wedding dress, no elaborate rituals. Under the gentle afternoon sunlight, Lena held my hand and spoke slowly, voice steady. "I'm not choosing you for what you have, but for the sense of safety I feel beside you. For me, that peace is enough." When it was my turn, I looked at her, speaking of the future without fear for the first time. "I can't promise a perfect life, but I promise I won't run away, even if the past knocks again." We exchanged simple silver rings and cut a cake prepared by Lena and her friends. Laughter rang out naturally, unforced, not to forget what happened, but to affirm we still had the right to start anew. Catherine cried, "Elizabeth in heaven must be wishing you both happiness." I nodded, my heart warm for the first time. A year later, I welcomed our firstborn daughter, naming her Emily, a name I chose for its gentleness and sense of new beginning. The day Emily was born in a Houston hospital, I held Lena's hand and cried, hearing her first wail. The tiny baby with big round eyes, and I whispered, "Emily, you're our new start." My life gradually centered around our small family, quiet evenings reading to Emily, simple routines like cooking with Lena, and a peace I never thought I could hold. We moved to our own home, a cozy suburban house with a small garden and a room for Emily. No more late meetings. I came home early to hold her, singing the lullabies my mother once sang. That peace was fragile but precious. After the storm, I cherished every moment. Catherine visited often, not just as an aunt, but as true family, witnessing me build a life very different from the previous generation. She brought gifts for Emily, picture books, toys, and sat for hours telling stories about my mother. She loved children so much. She watched me as a father. "You're like Elizabeth, loving unconditionally." I understood the past couldn't be erased. What happened would always be part of me. I still dreamed of my mother, of my father in prison, but upon waking I held Lena and Emily, knowing they were my present. Yet I also learned memories don't have to control choices, and pain has no right to decide the future. Dr. Ramirez taught, "The past is a lesson, not a prison." I applied it. When angry, I breathed deeply. When afraid, I remembered present peace. One afternoon, watching Emily play in the yard, toddling after butterflies, laughing brightly, I suddenly realized my journey wasn't about revenge or proving anything, but learning to stop at the right place. I sat beside Lena, hands intertwined, and whispered, "Finally, I feel like I'm in the right place. Now I understand family isn't just where you're born or ties of blood. Family only truly matters when built on mutual respect. Honesty enough that no one lives in lies, and clear boundaries so love doesn't become control or destruction." I once believed enduring was the way to preserve family, but eventually realized sometimes knowing when to stop and protect yourself is the only way to prevent further breakage. The lesson I keep for myself, and one day for my daughter, is not to let wounds become excuses to wound others. Not all pain needs retaliation, and not all relationships are worth holding at any cost. If needed, have the courage to walk away before silence turns to hatred and love to ruin. I look at Emily, her face glowing in the late afternoon light, and quietly promise, not with grand words, but with inner certainty, that she will grow up in peace without carrying the cracks I once bore. My life, from loss to serenity, isn't a tragedy, but proof that people always have the right to choose a different way to live, when they dare face the truth and know when to stop.